Hi, and welcome back to my channel. It's Peg, and today on Art Joy of Sharing, we did a live stream, and it was all about molding. Now, these pieces that I'm sanding are done with a quick cure clay from Ranger Industries. You heat set the clay, and so I'd use these molds from Iron Orchid and molded these birds, and then I heat set it with a tool. And I noticed that this one little end on there did not get set. I don't know what happened to that. But when these set up, they're pretty pretty sturdy stuff, you know. I have used a lot of different molding materials, a lot of different molding clays, and some of them still seem to be a little bit gushy when I get done using them, like the Crayola one or the paper clay. Sometimes they just don't really set up well. This stuff sets up really well. However, I will give you a precaution. This stuff irritates my skin. I have to use gloves, rubber gloves, when I work with it because it feels just like I've touched a cactus. So, uh, if you have sensitive skin, I would warn you against, touching the clay with your hands. So I have these bezels, and I decided I was going to do something with them. Now, today I'm going to work with both clay, air dry clay, that quick cure clay, and embossing powders, and some resin. So I'm just getting some pieces. This is a frame, and I'm going to back it with a piece of packing tape so that the resin doesn't flow through. And anytime you have something that's open in the back, you can do that. You can just put some tape behind and create a space for that to go into and not flow all over. Just make sure that you seal that tape down real well to the back of your piece. And have a little sharp piece hanging out there, so I'm going to sand that. So I'm just showing the audience the difference between the molding magic and the quick cure clay. And these are some pieces that I had molded the day before just in preparation for the live show. Now you can see these um, paper clay pieces or molding clay pieces are still a little soft, where this other clay sets up really hard. So I'm looking at different things. These are tissue papers that I had put resin on, and the resin makes the tissue fairly clear, and then you can use them in these resin pieces because you've sealed the paper. Now these papers have words, and I'm thinking about that bezel that I have there. I'm thinking I want to put a little quote inside of the bezel. I'm playing around with that one to see if I want to put that little piece of mylar behind it, or I have a lot of other ephemera that I can resin and turn into pieces that become other jewelry or art, or an assemblage piece that is going to go into your artwork. So these are some resin pieces that I had poured into molds previously. And I have this bezel that I had last night put the molding from Crayola into. And now I'm going to take some of this glittery paint and I'm going to paint over it, because what I did was I pressed a stamp into the surface of that, and I just want to get that down into the grooves of the image so that that stamping stands out on there. So I'm just going to wipe it back, and then you can see the texture that that's provided. So if you're new to my channel or Art Joy of Sharing or Shell, I want to tell you about it. We have a Facebook group called Art Joy of Sharing, and each week Chelsea and I do a live show for Art Joy of Sharing, which is another channel that we share each week at 10:30 Thursday morning, 10:30 Central Standard Time. And we'd love to have you come and visit there. It's an hour and a half show. Sometimes we run over a little bit, sometimes we're not quite that long, but we have a group of people who join us, mostly people who are part of that Facebook group. And, you can chat with them in the audience and you can ask your questions, and we share and make crafty projects. So, come and join the fun. So I've mixed up some ice resin. Ice resin is a product from Ranger Industries, and it's a two-part epoxy. You use the part A, and then you add the hardener, part B. You stir it up for about 2 minutes, and then you let it rest for about 2 minutes because it forms bubbles. And then you can use it to pour, or you can add coloration, whatever you want to it. So in these bezels, I am starting to layer collage pieces. Now on this one, I decided I was going to do something different. So I'm going to get some of that quick cure clay. This is also a Ranger Industries product. And the thing about it is you heat set the clay. Now, polymer clay, you bake in an oven, and you could bake this stuff in an oven just like polymer clay, but it doesn't take that long. I mean, you start the chemical reaction at one end, you just heat one side of the clay, and then the heat travels across the clay. It kind of cooks itself, and it hardens. I don't know what the magic is, but that's what it does. So I'm pushing that clay into the bezel. I'm scraping off the excess, and I'll just put that back in the bag. Now, the reason I liked this clay was because you didn't have to wait for it to harden. And, you could heat set it quite quickly. And it doesn't dry out sitting on the shelf. Part of the problem with paper clay is you get a bag of it and you don't use it right away, and then it dries out sitting on the shelf. So I'm getting some rubber stamps with some imagery, and I'm pushing those down into the clay because I want to create some texture on the surface of that clay. Now, this would be enough if you just, wanted to paint that and add some resin over the top, but no, I have to take it another step. So I'm sorry, it's a little out of focus there. I have actually two cameras running when I do these shows. So, this is the secondary recording because the camera that we use for the show has both Shell's project and my project on the same screen. So, you can watch the both of us working at the same time. And Shell typically does a fast replay on her channel also, so you can check that out there if you want to see the fast video. But I'm using some embossing powder from Emerald Creek. These are 3 different embossing powders: Champagne, Tau Sunset, and Dragon's Egg. And they each have a different texture, but I thought those would be fun to mix up on this piece. And you're going to heat set the embossing powder, so I thought, well, let's heat set the embossing powder and the clay at the same time and see what we can get. So, just looking at different pieces, trying to figure out where I'm going to go next. And yeah, might take me a minute. Okay, these are my bead trays, and I use these when I am using molds and things because um, they're flat and molds bend, and you don't want to bend your mold when you're putting clay and epoxy and stuff in it, especially when they have to set to dry. And they're stackable. So these bead trays work really well for that. Now I'm getting some Bria Reese. This is glitter ink, and I'm going to add some of that glitter ink to the resin that I have in my cup. This has been sitting for a while, so the bubbles should be out of it. But I'm going to stir it up again and create some more. And I wanted a blue, and it ended up being a purple, mislabeled, I don't know what. So I go back and try to add some more blue to it. It's still purple. Ah, oh well, we're going to have a purple mermaid, I guess. Shell was kind of happy about that because she likes purple. So I'm going to pour that into this mold. This is from Iron Orchid, and they make these molds. Another place that has good molds like this is Prima. Prima Marketing has some really nice molds like this. I also get fondant molds from Amazon, and I'll try to remember to put a link into my Amazon store for you. I have different categories in my Amazon store. So, like if you're looking for, say, watercolor, or you're looking for mixed media, or you can go in there and cruise around. And I have pulled out some of my favorite things that you might be interested in for your stash. So, still trying to use up this purple resin. So, I've got this other mold, it's like feathers, and I thought, well, why not purple feathers? They're fantasy feathers, right? So, just pouring that resin in there, and then I'll set those trays aside to dry. Of course, I end up kicking them over before the show's done, and I don't know if I'm going to get anything out of today's work. We'll see. Some days are better than others. Um, but this again, when you're working with resin, it's good to have gloves on when you're working with resin because that stuff is not good for your skin either. So I'm going to hit those with a heat gun just what that does is it pops the bubbles in the resin, it brings them up to the surface, and you don't want bubbles in your resin. So if you just heat it briefly, you're going to pop those bubbles. And I decided to sprinkle a little bit of gold flake on there. We'll see if it does anything in the end. I don't know. So I have this other cup of resin. It's gotten a little bit too thick to work. I'm just spreading it on some paper. This is a note from my mother. And I might be able to use a piece of that. I might be able to punch it out or do something, but yeah, that resin has just gotten too hard. You have to work within the time frame. This is paper that has resin on it, and you see how clear it gets and how nice it is. So I guess I'm going to mix up some more. I have a few other projects I want to finish before the show is over. And so I want to coat those pieces that have the embossing powder on it and that other little heart. So it's going to take a little bit of resin to do that. And I apologize, everything seemed to be getting out of frame here. So I cut out the part where I was just mixing up a new batch of resin, and I'm just coating a few things with resin. We had some projects that we had started, and I wanted to coat that piece that we put the not epoxy, embossing powder. I keep saying epoxy. Put the embossing powder on. I want to coat that little heart that we put the blingy paste onto. And then I've got a few other pieces I'm working on there. So I'm mixing some golden tones and golden flecks into this cup of embossing powder because I have this cute little goldfish mold and I want to do a resin goldfish. So I thought I would do that. And that again is colored with some of that Bria Reese ink. And then I have this other fish. It looks more like a catfish than a goldfish. But I thought I'd make him gold anyway. I mean, there are gold catfish. Koi, you know, are just another version of catfish. And then I'm going to pour some of that into that little square piece that we put the tape on the back of. And I'm going to use my other resin heart in the middle of that. So I have kind of a raised surface. And then I have another heart, this bezel. And I'm, thinking about what do I want to put inside of that, but I've still got resin, so I'm going to pour that into the bezel. And then I think I'm going to start doing some kind of collaging in there. And I'm hitting that with a heat tool just to pop any bubbles that might be in there. And continuing to look at my stash to see what I want to use in there. And I look at some of these antique lady pictures and music and, different things that I have, and I'm thinking about what I want to put into this piece. I have this lady's head and I'm trimming it out to see how it'll fit in there, and then I decide I don't want all that excess paper, so I'm going to end up cutting that, making a mess. I'm coating it with some perfect paper adhesive so that it seals the paper, because if you don't seal the paper before you put it in a resin project like that, the paper is going to absorb the resin and it's going to kind of destroy the image. So I have a punched out piece of paper and I like the texture that it's putting in behind that resin, but I moved it around a couple of different places, and then I'm looking at my lady again and trying to figure out, is that really what I want there? I will probably add several more layers to this because I haven't really filled this all up, and I have a quote from Ernest Hemingway that's on one of those resin sheets that I'm going to add to this. So I'll set that tray aside because it's got to dry. And we are nearing the end of the show now. So, all of these things have to set at least overnight to be able to come out of the molds. And I'll try to remember to put some pictures up on Instagram and in the Facebook group so that you guys can see how they turned out in the long run. I think they'll be really pretty. The resin usually, especially if you use inks like this, are kind of translucent. If you use paints and things, they are not as translucent. So, think about what you're adding to your resin and what the overall effect is going to be, whether it's something that you're going to enjoy or not. Looks like I'm making space to do something else, but I don't know if I actually did anything else here. But come and join us on Art Joy of Sharing Facebook group and use our hashtags so that we can find what you're doing. And I'd love to see any molding work that you've got. So that's it. Bye for now.